The Daniels family was what most would call picture perfect. A charming suburban house in Portland, Oregon, 2 luxury cars in the driveway, and a love story that seemed to belong in the pages of a romance novel. Mark Daniels, a successful entrepreneur in his late 30s, had built a life of comfort and security for his wife, Erica. Together, they appeared as the epitome of a modern American couple, attractive, ambitious, and deeply in love. But appearances, as Mark had come to understand, could be deceiving. For years, Mark prided himself on his meticulous nature, a trait that served him well in business but sometimes made his personal relationships more complicated. Lately, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was amiss in his marriage. Erica, who had always been his anchor and confidant, seemed distant. The late-night phone calls, hurried conversations, and unexplained absences gnawed at the corners of his mind. It wasn't jealousy, Mark assured himself, it was pragmatism. If something was wrong, he needed to know. So, driven by equal parts fear and curiosity, Mark concocted a plan. It wasn't conventional, nor was it ethical, but it was the only way he could confront his suspicions without jumping to conclusions. He reached out to a friend of a friend, a personal trainer named Cole, who was as charming as he was muscular, and proposed an unusual job, testing Erica's faithfulness. Cole hesitated at first. "Are you sure about this, man? It feels a little extreme," he said, running a hand through his dark hair as he glanced at the wad of cash Mark offered as payment. "I need clarity," Mark replied, his voice firm but tinged with vulnerability. "I need to know if the woman I've built my life with is still the person I thought she was." Reluctantly, Cole agreed. The plan was simple: he would meet Erica at a local cafe, strike up a casual conversation, and subtly test her boundaries. Nothing overtly aggressive, just enough to gauge her reactions. On a crisp autumn morning, Mark sat in his car parked discreetly near the cafe. Through the large windows, he saw Erica, dressed in a soft blue cardigan and sipping her usual chai latte. Her beauty was undeniable, even after a decade of marriage. Cole approached her table, his easy smile and confident demeanor drawing her attention. Mark watched, his heart pounding in his chest. Erica smiled back. Mark sat in his car, his eyes fixed on the cafe window, the tension building with every passing second. Inside, Erica and Cole's conversation seemed to flow effortlessly. She laughed at something he said, the sound carrying faintly through the slightly open car window. Mark had always loved her laugh, but hearing it now, directed at another man, twisted his stomach into knots. An hour passed, and Mark's imagination ran wild. What were they talking about? Was Cole sticking to the script? He had been explicit in his instructions: keep it casual, light, and above all, test the waters subtly. Cole had nodded seriously at the briefing, but now, Mark's confidence in the plan wavered. Finally, Cole stood to leave, offering a polite wave as he exited the cafe. Erica lingered, her gaze following him for a moment before she returned to her phone, typing a quick message. Mark slumped in his seat, a mix of relief and dread coursing through him. The test was over, but he had no idea what the results would be. That evening, Mark met Cole in a dimly lit bar downtown. Cole arrived wearing the same casual confidence he'd carried into the cafe. Sliding into the booth across from Mark, he ordered a beer before leaning forward conspiratorially. "Well?" Mark asked, barely able to contain his anxiety. Cole hesitated, a rare flicker of discomfort crossing his usually composed features. "Look, man, you wanted the truth, right?" "Of course," Mark snapped. "That's why I hired you." "All right." Cole exhaled heavily. She asked me to sleep with her." Mark's heart stopped. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "What?" he whispered. Cole nodded grimly. "We talked for about an hour. I started with small talk, complimented her taste in books, asked about her day. She was polite at first, but then, something changed. I could tell she was interested, you know. She leaned in, laughed a little too much. So, I tested the boundaries, mentioned how beautiful she was. And that's when she took it further." Mark's face flushed hot, and his hands trembled. "What exactly did she say?" "She suggested we go back to her place." Cole's voice softened, as if trying to lessen the blow. "I didn't push. She made the move." The words hit Mark like a freight train. He leaned back in the booth, staring blankly at the beer in front of him. His mind churned with disbelief, anger, and humiliation. How could this be true? The woman he had shared his life with, the woman he had trusted implicitly, had crumbled under the weight of a stranger's attention in less than an hour. I didn't go through with it, Cole added hastily. I told her I wasn't that kind of guy and left. But I thought you should know. Mark nodded numbly, barely hearing him. The bar felt too loud, the air too thick. He threw a few bills on the table and left without another word. When Mark returned home that night, Erica was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. The sight of her, so familiar, so normal, made his stomach churn. Her betrayal was now a secret between them, a chasm he would never cross. Hey, honey, she said brightly, looking up at him. You're home late. How was work? Fine, he muttered, avoiding her gaze as he hung up his coat. Just busy. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment before returning to her phone. Mark stood in the doorway, watching her as an overwhelming urge to confront her gripped him. But he held back, unsure of how to begin, or if he even wanted to. The next morning, while Erica was out, Mark began packing her belongings. It was a mechanical process, devoid of emotion. He moved through their bedroom, her closet, their shared bathroom, methodically collecting her things and tossing them into garbage bags. The memories attached to each item clawed at him, a scarf he had bought her on a trip to Aspen, the perfume she wore on their wedding day, but he pushed the emotions aside. By the time Erica returned that evening, the house had been stripped of all traces of her presence. Her clothes, shoes, and personal items were piled unceremoniously on the lawn. Mark sat on the front porch, his expression unreadable, waiting for her to arrive. When her car pulled into the driveway, she froze, staring at the chaotic scene in shock. She stepped out hesitantly, her eyes darting between Mark and the scattered belongings. Mark? What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. You failed the test, Erica, he said, his voice flat but resolute. You betrayed me. Pack your things and leave. Her face paled, and her mouth opened and closed, searching for words. What are you talking about? What test? Mark, please. Don't. He raised a hand, his calm exterior cracking just enough to reveal the fury beneath. I know what you did. Don't insult me with lies. Erica's protests died on her lips as the realization dawned. She stood there, speechless, as Mark turned and walked inside, slamming the door behind him. As the night fell, Mark sat in the darkened living room, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The house was eerily quiet, the absence of Erica's presence both liberating and agonizing. He had done what he thought was right, what he thought was necessary, but the emptiness left in her wake was undeniable. What would come next? Mark didn't know. All he knew was that the life he had built, the trust he had cherished, was gone forever. The sun rose over the quiet Portland neighborhood, casting its warm light on a home that now felt cold and empty. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The events of the previous night replayed in his head like a haunting refrain. Erica's shocked expression, her tearful pleas, the sound of the door slamming behind him, it was all etched into his memory. The house, once filled with the comforting rhythms of their life together, was now oppressively silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed loud in the stillness. Mark hadn't slept, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on him. He knew he had taken the right step, there was no going back now, but the hollowness it left behind was harder to bear than he'd anticipated. The doorbell rang mid-morning, jarring him from his thoughts. He opened the door to find Erica standing on the porch. She looked disheveled, her eyes red and puffy from crying. In her hands was a box filled with neatly folded clothes, a few framed photos, and other small personal items. She was trembling. Mark, please, she began, her voice shaky but determined. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, he replied coldly. You made your choice. I didn't, she started, but he interrupted her. Don't try to deny it. Don't insult me by pretending it didn't happen. Tears welled up in her eyes. I was stupid, Mark. It was a moment of weakness. But nothing actually happened. I swear to you. Mark's jaw tightened. Nothing happened because I intervened before it could. Do you even realize what you've done? You've shattered everything. How am I supposed to trust you after this? She took a hesitant step closer. Mark, I love you. I know I've made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, talk to someone. Counseling, he spat. You think some therapist can erase what you did? Erase the image of you flirting with another man, inviting him into our life? Erica flinched at his words. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them heavy with unspoken pain. Finally, Mark stepped back, his voice quieter but no less resolute. I need time, Erica. Time to figure out what's left of us, if there's anything left at all. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. I'll give you time. But please, don't shut me out completely. The next few days were a blur for Mark. He threw himself into work, staying late at the office and avoiding calls from Erica. Each night, he returned to the empty house, his exhaustion no match for the restless thoughts that consumed him. Memories of their life together played in his mind like an old film reel, the laughter they shared, the trips they took, the promises they made. How had it all gone so wrong? Mark sought refuge in the one thing he still had control over, his business. As the owner of a small but thriving tech company, he poured himself into his work, spending hours drafting proposals and meeting with clients. It was a distraction, but not a cure. The pain of Erica's betrayal lingered, a wound that refused to heal. One evening, as Mark sat in his office staring blankly at his computer screen, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his best friend, Jason. Hey, man. Let's grab a drink. You've been MIA. We need to talk. Mark hesitated before replying. Jason had always been his confidant, the person he turned to when life became overwhelming. Maybe it was time to share the burden. Sure. The usual spot. 8 p.m. First rounds on me. The bar was dimly lit, with the faint hum of conversation and the clink of glasses providing a familiar comfort. Jason was already at a booth, nursing a beer. He waved Mark over, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. You look like hell, Jason said as Mark slid into the seat across from him. Thanks, Mark muttered, signaling the waitress for a drink. Jason leaned forward. All right, spill. What's going on? Mark hesitated, then took a deep breath. I tested Erica. Sent a guy to see if she'd, you know. Jason raised an eyebrow. You what? I needed to know if I could trust her, Mark said defensively. Things have been off. And I was right. She fell for it. Asked him to sleep with her. Jason whistled low. Damn. That's heavy. Mark ran a hand through his hair. I threw her out. Told her we were done. But now. I don't know. She says it was a mistake, that she loves me. And part of me wants to believe her. Jason nodded slowly. Look, man, I'm not gonna pretend I know what you're going through. But here's the thing, you've got to figure out what you want. Is this a deal breaker, or is there something worth saving? I don't know, Mark admitted. I thought I knew her. But now. Jason clapped a hand on his shoulder. Take your time. Don't rush into anything. But whatever you do, make sure it's what you really want. Not what you think you should do, or what anyone else thinks. This is your life. Mark nodded, the weight of Jason's words sinking in. As the night wore on, they talked about everything and nothing, old memories, work, sports, until the heaviness in Mark's chest lifted just enough for him to breathe. Later that night, as Mark lay in bed, his thoughts drifted back to Erica. He remembered the way she smiled when they first met, the sound of her laugh when he told her lame jokes, the way she fit perfectly in his arms. Was there still a part of that Erica left? And if there was, could he find it again? For the first time in days, Mark closed his eyes and let himself hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. But it would take more than words, it would take rebuilding trust from the ground up. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to take that step. The next few weeks brought little clarity, only more questions. Mark buried himself in work, his days consumed by meetings and deadlines, while his nights were spent staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories and doubts. He hadn't spoken to Erica since their confrontation on the porch. Her calls and texts went unanswered, her tearful voicemail pleas left unheard. Mark told himself he needed the silence to think, but in truth, he feared what he might find if he confronted her again. It was late on a Friday evening when Mark's sister, Rachel, showed up at his door unannounced. She strode in without waiting for an invitation, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "You've been avoiding everyone, Mark," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I'm not leaving until you tell me what's going on." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated, Rach." "Life's complicated," she shot back. "Start talking." Over the next hour, Mark recounted everything, his suspicions, the test, the fallout. Rachel listened intently, her expression softening as he spoke. When he finished, she sat back, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's a lot," she said finally. "But, Mark, don't you think it's time you stopped punishing both of you and actually dealt with this?" "What do you mean?" he asked, frowning. "I mean, have you thought about why she did it? Why she even entertained the idea? People don't just wake up one day and decide to betray someone they love. Something pushed her there. Maybe you need to figure out what that was before you decide if it's really over." Her words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on his own pain, his own sense of betrayal, that he hadn't stopped to consider Erica's perspective. What had driven her to that point? Had their marriage been on shakier ground than he realized? Rachel reached out and squeezed his hand. "Whatever you decide, Mark, just remember, people make mistakes. Some can be forgiven, and some can't. Only you can decide where this falls." The following Sunday, Mark found himself parked outside the small, cozy rental Erica had moved into after their separation. He had spent the weekend agonizing over whether to reach out, but Rachel's words lingered in his mind. He needed answers. Erica opened the door, surprise flickering across her face when she saw him. "Mark," she said softly. "I didn't think I'd see you." "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The apartment was sparsely decorated, a stark contrast to the home they had shared. A faint scent of lavender hung in the air, and a half-finished puzzle lay on the coffee table. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between them a tangible reminder of all that had been lost. "I need to understand," Mark began, his voice steady. "Why, Erica? Why did you even consider it?" She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Start with the truth," he said, his gaze unwavering. Erica took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "I felt invisible, Mark. For months, maybe even years. You were always so busy with work, with building your business. I know you were doing it for us, but I felt like I was barely part of your life anymore." Her voice cracked, and she looked away. "When Cole started talking to me, it wasn't about him. It was about feeling seen, feeling wanted. It was selfish and stupid, and I hate myself for even entertaining it. But it was never about love. I've only ever loved you." Mark listened in silence, her words cutting deeper than he expected. He thought back to the late nights at the office, the weekends spent buried in work. How often had he come home exhausted, too tired to notice the quiet pain in her eyes? Had he been so focused on providing for their future that he had neglected their present? "Do you think that excuses what you did?" he asked, his voice tight. "No," she said quickly, her tears spilling over. "There's no excuse. What I did was wrong, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But, Mark, I swear, nothing actually happened. I didn't cross that line. I wanted to stop feeling alone, but it wasn't worth losing you. It never was." Her vulnerability hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Mark looked at her, seeing not the confident, put-together woman he had married, but someone who was just as broken and flawed as he felt. That night, Mark returned home, his mind racing. Erica's confession had shaken him. He had come seeking answers, but instead, he found more questions. Could he forgive her? Did he even want to? As he lay in bed, memories of their life together surfaced again. But this time, they weren't tainted by betrayal. He thought of their first date, the way she had laughed at his terrible jokes. He thought of the night he proposed, the way her eyes lit up when she said yes. And he thought of the promises they had made, to love and support each other through everything. Was this a test of their marriage, or its end? Mark didn't know the answer yet. But for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to consider the possibility of healing, not just for their marriage, but for himself. The house felt heavy with the weight of Mark's decision. Days had passed since his conversation with Erica, and the silence between them was deafening. He spent those days reflecting, replaying her words, and sifting through the fragments of their marriage, trying to discern what was salvageable and what was not. On the morning of what Mark had unconsciously decided would be a pivotal day, he woke early. The winter sun cast long shadows across the living room, where he sat surrounded by photographs of their life together. Their wedding day, vacations, quiet moments captured in time, all spoke of a love that once felt unbreakable. He reached for his phone, his fingers hesitating over Erica's name. With a deep breath, he hit call. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft, as if she had been waiting. "Mark," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you again." "We need to meet," he said simply. The cafe where they had shared countless Sunday mornings was quieter than usual. Erica was already seated when Mark arrived, nursing a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly around the mug. She looked up as he approached, her eyes searching his for a hint of what was to come. "Thanks for coming," he said, sitting across from her. "Thank you for calling," she replied. Her voice was tentative, as if one wrong word might shatter the fragile moment. For a long time, neither spoke. Mark studied her face, seeing both the woman he fell in love with and the stranger she had become. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot," he began. "About us, about what we've been through, about what's left." Erica's grip on her mug tightened. "And what have you decided?" Mark hesitated, the weight of his next words pressing down on him. "I've decided that I can't go back to what we had before. Too much has happened. Too much has changed." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mark, please. I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But I swear, I'll do anything to fix this. Anything." He held up a hand, his own voice trembling. "Let me finish." She fell silent, her tear-streaked face filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "You're right," he continued. "You made a mistake, a terrible one. But I also failed you. I was so focused on building a life for us that I forgot to live it with you. I didn't see the signs. I didn't listen when you needed me. And that's on me." Her lips parted in surprise, but she didn't interrupt. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were," Mark said, his voice cracking. "But I also don't know if I'm ready to walk away completely. What I do know is that if we're going to try, it's going to take time, effort, and honesty. From both of us." Erica's tears fell harder, but this time, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mark. I'll go to counseling. I'll rebuild your trust, one day at a time. I just need the chance to prove to you that I can be better." Mark nodded slowly, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "This isn't forgiveness, Erica. Not yet. But it's a chance. A chance to see if we can build something new from the ashes." Months passed, each day a delicate balancing act of rebuilding and confronting the past. They attended counseling together, laying bare the wounds they had inflicted on each other. It wasn't easy, there were fights, moments of doubt, and nights where the pain felt insurmountable. But there were also moments of connection, glimpses of the love that had once defined them. Mark wasn't sure when it happened, but one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Erica reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said softly. "For everything." He squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "I know. And I'm sorry too." The final test came on a rainy evening, nearly a year after their separation. Erica had planned a dinner to mark their progress, a quiet celebration of how far they had come. As they sat across from each other at the dining table, their laughter mingling with the sound of rain against the windows, Mark realized something profound. He didn't just love Erica, he respected her. For owning her mistakes, for fighting to rebuild what they had lost, and for showing him that love, even when fractured, could be stronger than he ever imagined. As the evening wound down, Erica looked at him, her expression vulnerable. "Do you think we've made it?" Mark smiled, the answer clear in his heart. "We're not the same people we were. And that's okay. What we've built now is stronger, because we fought for it. Together." She smiled through her tears, and Mark knew they had found their way back to each other, not to the life they had before, but to a new one. One built on honesty, resilience, and love reborn. What would you do in Mark's shoes? Can love truly rebuild trust after betrayal? Share your thoughts and let's discuss this emotional journey.